Welcome to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have open and honest conversations about co-parenting, separation, divorce, and the hardest question of all, should you stay or should you go? I'm Kate Anthony, your divorce survival guide, and I'm here to help you navigate some of the roughest waters you've ever swum in and answer some of your toughest questions. I've been to hell and back. And now it's my mission in life to help you get to the other side of this process with your sanity and your heart intact.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I feel like my guest today needs no introduction. My dear friend, Michelle Dempsey-Multack is here. For those of you who don't know her, she is a certified divorce and co-parenting specialist, a best-selling author, and educator for divorce coaches and top 1% podcaster, known for her ability to inspire and empower moms through their divorce and co-parenting journeys. Michelle's passion for putting the child first in the divorce process while helping everyone she reaches feel supported and empowered makes her a sought-after coach by clients as well as divorce industry professionals from around the globe. That'd be me. Michelle solidified her place as a thought leader in the divorce space with her recent publication of her best-selling book, Moms Moving On, real-life advice on conquering divorce, co-parenting through conflict, and becoming your best self. Moms Moving On was published by Simon & Schuster, and it is a fantastic read. I highly recommend anybody and everybody read this book. And I'm excited to bring you my conversation with Michelle. We just sort of went all over the map, as we do. We didn't really have anything specific planned, and I just turned on the mic and allowed it to just record us having a conversation. So here we are, me and Michelle Dempsey-Multack in conversation. Michelle, I'm so happy to have you back on my show. I love you so much.
I love you too. And I'm so happy to be here. This is, I know, everybody's favorite divorce podcast. And so I'm honored to be a repeat offender. It's the second time, third time. I don't know, but I'll always say yes.
Yes, I love you. So today we're going to have a conversation about sort of the divorce profession, right? People always say, you know, let's do what's in the best interests of the kids. But we were just talking about before we hit record that like so few people actually are trained. So few divorce professionals are trained in knowing what the hell that means.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So like, where's the gap, or where do you see this manifesting?
So where I see this manifesting, and you know, I'm going to sound like I'm generalizing here, but I'm not. I'm just giving my experience and what I've seen from clients and from myself personally. I had to hire 3 lawyers before I found somebody who actually asked me, like, how is she doing with co-parenting, and how is the transition on her, and might this be too much? And I'm like, wow, you're the first person to ask me that. So what I see the issue is, lawyers have a job to do, and they do it very well. They go to law school, they get trained, they understand the law and the statutes and all of the things in whatever state they're from. But at no point do they sit down and take a co-parenting class that can give them the perspective that will show them that the more conflict these 2 adults are in, the worse off their kids are going to be long term. Now, every lawyer is going to say, we want what's best for your kids. But then I have clients who come to me and they'll say, you know, I didn't even realize I think my ex is a narcissist. Really? Why do you say that? My lawyer told me he's definitely a narcissist. He's never seen anything like this. And right there, that's an indication of we're creating a label for somebody we've never even met that's only going to ramp up defense and tension and conflict. And thus, we are not putting the children first, right? Because if we were, we'd be trying to avoid conflict at all costs. But it's like a double-edged sword, because if you're a lawyer, you have to make money, and you make money by engaging in dispute.
By ramping up conflict. Yes, if you're a litigator, for sure, right? That's Absolutely. I think there are times when I think it's useful, right, to know what you're dealing with on the other side.
Yes.
Because narcissists and abusers go towards conflict. So that is important to know too, right?
Yes. But I do think there's a difference between a client or potential client going to their lawyer and saying, this is what I'm dealing with. I'm getting these abusive text messages. He didn't let me, know about our finances when we were married, and now it's even worse. Then you can say, okay, this is going to be a high conflict individual. But when you just right off the bat say, oh yeah, he cheated on you, sounds like a narcissist, and then we're falling into this narrative. Anyway, that's one of the things. Creating a personality for a person they haven't met yet. I think what that does for the person who then comes to me is it instills a sense of fear, and fear then makes you more protective. And with that protective emotion, you're less likely to be more flexible in the co-parenting process or the parenting plan process. So I think that's a big issue. I think the other big issue is, when we talk about meeting the needs of the children, there's a great podcast that I was on called How to Split a Toaster.
I love those guys so much.
I do too. And I think that title is so perfect, right?
It's the best title of a podcast ever. I love it.
Our kids are not toasters. They're not timeshares in Bimini. These are people. These are kids that may be struggling already with social issues, learning issues. Now we're splitting up their homes, and, we're saying, one parent is saying, well, 50-50 is what's fair. And we don't, I don't think there's enough people coming in and saying, well, what's fair for you isn't necessarily fair for them. So how are we going to look at that?
Right. Yes. And we are both certified by Christina McGee and the Mostyn Guthrie Academy as certified co-parenting specialists. And this is
such an amazing training.
It's amazing training. And it's a huge part of our training was people are constantly saying, well, what's in the best interest of the children, without actually knowing how to determine what's in the best interest for the children. Right.
Right. That's where Christina taught us that strategy that I love of bringing the children into the room, not
physically,
literally, not physically, but metaphorically. Right. She even suggested, if you're going to mediation and you're going to be so emotionally, ramped up by your ex and the fact that they're asking for X, Y, and Z, bring a picture of your children. Have that with you. She told us as professionals to suggest this to clients because something I've noticed, and I'm sure you have too with your clients, is it doesn't matter how angry or upset or hurt a client is on the other side of the screen. When I say, tell me about your kids, their eyes light up, they smile, they soften. And so in doing that and bringing the children into the room, it helps reshift your perspective back to what matters. And I think that was, for me, one of the biggest takeaways from that training.
I love that. And, for me, one of the bigger takeaways too was this idea that, we always say 50-50. First of all, Christine also taught us to hate those terms, right? Because that is splitting a child in half or splitting a toaster. We've taught that equal shared parenting, as we like to call it, is better for children. But if the children are not used to that, if dad is almost not a stranger, but goes to work, if you've got a stay-at-home mom and a dad who's going to work every single day, maybe equal shared parenting is something that you want to work towards
100%.
But maybe it's not the best idea for the kids, right? And this is why, we also have a movement afoot trying to get percentage of custody out of the support conversation. Because
they should not go hand in hand at all.
They should not. And they do in almost all states. It's insane. And it's dangerous.
I agree with that. And the majority of my clients come to me with children, usually 8 and under, and many of them 5 and under, because I think, I draw in that clientele because my own daughter was 2 when I separated. And what I did wrong, honestly, was I knew for sure I wanted to be a 50-50 co-parent because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a relationship with my father. And for me, my daughter's relationship with her dad is very important. But I didn't, at the beginning, I said, of course you're going to have 50-50, but she was 2. And even when a dad is amazing, like my ex was very hands-on when we were together, I was still the preferred parent because I was mom. She was still crawling up my leg all the time. I was, the one wiping her tush and driving her to school and doing all those things. And so there should have been somebody in the process to say, wait a second, yes, 50-50, perfect. But we got to give Bella some time to work up to that. Right. And I didn't know that. You don't know what you don't know. I was just so worried about I wanted him to get what was fair and I didn't want the system to mess that up for us. Right. But then I wasn't really looking at it thank God 6 years later, we're all good. But you don't think about how hard it might be for a child. But from the male perspective, I get why they get so triggered and they start to fight for what's fair for them, because they know that when kids are young, they have this desire for mom. And that makes them feel really shut out and unimportant. And then they're just fighting to feel equal. So listen, you just posted about it today. We're asking people to make the most difficult decisions of their lives at the most emotional time of their lives. And that's why they need the perspective of the children.
That's right. That's right. I totally agree with that. And, we did the same thing. It was like immediate 50-50, except that my ex-husband's work schedule, did not remotely accommodate for that. It didn't work. And so then I had to go pick up our son every day after school anyway, and then keep him probably through dinner. Right. And so on the one hand,
that's how mine is too.
Yeah. I didn't get the sort of expectation of what the schedule was really going to be like. And my son didn't actually, anyway, it doesn't matter. It was we learned from it, but there is such a thing in your parenting plan. You can do a step up approach where you're like, you know what? It's Bella, Emmett, whoever is used to this amount of time. Let's keep that. And then over time, we can
work up to it.
We can shift slowly over time as they get older.
Yeah. That is the smartest. There's a reason why, I don't know about in your area, but preschools in my area, when a child is starting school under the age of 4, they don't just go full time to preschool. I remember Bella's first week was 3 mornings a week for an hour. Then the next week it was 4 mornings for 2 hours. And they worked her up to it because it was a huge transition. And so it's the same idea with co-parenting for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I want to talk about the other side of things for a second.
Yeah.
So, there's plenty of people who weaponize the children in high conflict and abusive situations. And then we have the lawyers, who don't want to tell their client, listen, you're being an asshole, dude. This is not fair. This is not right for the children. And then sort of incite or instigate a little bit. And that's never mind just splitting the child and talking about percentages. Then it's putting the children in a dangerous and potentially harmful situation that once you sign that parenting plan or those divorce papers, very hard to undo. And so there's so much with that too. I bet you see that all the time.
Oh, absolutely. Kids end up in the middle, right? In situations like that, they just end up there and they're used as pawns. And it's, again, this is part of why the separating out custody from because people are looking at they're looking at their finances. They're looking at money. Yes. I see that all the time. And this is where accusations of parental alienation, which is, I put in air quotes because it's not real. It's not a thing. We're not allowed to, we should not be using the term parental alienation. We call it domestic violence by proxy, right? When you're using the children as a tool of abuse and it's post-separation abuse. But yes, I work almost exclusively with women who are being abused, and they're fucking terrified of leaving their children in the care of an abuser. And unfortunately, speaking of divorce professionals not knowing what it is that they are, not having the education, judges, as you well know, judges and divorce attorneys, nobody's required to have any training in domestic violence and recognizing the signs of abuse.
I don't know, I think now, at least in the Miami family court system, like there are so many opportunities for learning. There are lunch and learns. And I know that this is a big conversation amongst,
Is it?
the legal, yes, because I think more and more people are starting to see never mind just like the abuse of one parent from the other, the abuse of, the justice system and filing a motion every 3 hours
after
and,
motion after
motion
yeah.
after motion after motion. It's abuse of the justice system. And then, you're making a mockery of what everybody's there to really do, which is like one job and get these people out of court. And so I think, hopefully more and more people are learning, but I wish every law school from sea to shining sea had something like we took, that co-parenting specialist training where it forced professionals to look at things differently. And there are so many amazing attorneys out there that do that. We have collaborative attorneys, we have mediators who are really focused on that. And there are lawyers that I refer to all the time because I know that they are so child focused. They have personal experience with divorce and co-parenting. And I think that matters a lot too. But until, we see a real change in how things are handled, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's scary for me because I was a part of that system. I was a child in the middle of divorce for 10 years. Right. And it was, I'm still working on that.
Right. It's, I mean, I was too, but different circumstances, but yeah, I mean, I didn't have a relationship with my dad, but not because I was taken from him or kept from him, but because he kind of opted out for a while.
But now you do.
Now I do.
And he's so cute. And you guys are cute together. I long for that, Kate. Like I will never have that at this point. My biological father and I were in the same room 2 weeks ago for my nephew's bris and doesn't even look in my direction. It's horrendous. And but I will say that he's got his own issues, but 30 years ago when this all went down, when I ended up estranged from my father, nobody came into the mix and said reunification, therapy. You can't just stop talking to your dad because, nobody intervened. And had they done that, it could have been a very different outcome for me.
Interesting.
Yeah. I hate when I see, it's a trigger for me, I think, to see there are so many teenage girls that prepubescent age, 12, 13, that end up in court and they just don't want to see their dad anymore for one reason or the other. And I have more and more male clients coming to me freaking out, like, why is this happening? What's going on? And I know what's happening. It's
what is happening?
Again, speaking in generalities, but from working with the clients that I work with, the men that I've worked with, a lot of it is what mom is saying on the other end. Girls at the age of 12 and 13 are very mature, and moms tend to feel, I've got a buddy now and I can tell this buddy everything. And this is still a very emotionally immature person on the inside who's also going through puberty and dealing with all of the social pressures of life. And they then develop anger and they have nowhere else to take it out, but on the person that,
Yeah. So this is the complexity of the word alienation, right? Because that kind of is, right?
Yeah. If I have
what
a
are your thoughts
right
on
now,
that? I mean, this is such a touchy, do you want to go on the third rail with me on this?
Let's do it. I've got nothing else to do.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Got my bubbly water.
So
no, but for example, I have a client right now who came to me, the sweetest man, in tears. He didn't know what to do because his daughter wanted to go to sleepaway camp and he can't afford that. To go to a good sleepaway camp is like taking out a second mortgage. So couldn't afford it. And his daughter was so upset. And the conversation with mom was, well, if your dad really loved you, he wouldn't have leased that new car. He would have sent you to sleepaway camp, or he wouldn't have taken his girlfriend to Napa. He would have sent you to sleepaway camp. So that angry 13-year-old girl, what do you think? Right. Not appropriate.
Not
and whether or not that may be true, but you're now turning a child against her father for something he can't even provide, even if he wanted to. He felt like a pilot. Like, and I see this. So is this alienation? In a way it is, but I don't use the term parental alienation in the Richard Gardner way, because I think, right.
because Richard Gardner was a criminal and a pedophile.
Abuser.
So,
right. Yes.
Right.
But I do think, we can alienate people from anything, right? Like, I can alienate my daughter from soccer because I fucking hate going to the soccer field 3 times a day. I can tell her soccer's bad. You're going to get bug bites. No, the ball's going to hit you in the face. I'm alienating her at that point. But do I think the courts have taken the parents' emotions and how they might be feeling in one particular situation and said, see that right there, that's alienation? I think they've taken that too far. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that there's this weird, you can't say that something is alienation because people freak out because the word is, like I said, it's a third rail in our industry. But also there are times when, like you said, like when a parent, and it's not like you can't ever say anything, quote, negative about the other parent. Like sometimes, sometimes it's truth, right? People are like, oh, but that's just the truth. He spent money on a lease of a car. And so he couldn't afford, right? That's just the truth. But that's not something that the child needs.
It's not the burden the child, right?
Absolutely.
Like sometimes my 8-year-olds will say to me, Mommy, how much did that cost? And I'm like, it doesn't matter, babe. It's not, you never have to worry about that. I appreciate that you're mindful and you're respectful of when I say, we can't buy that because it's too much money, but like, you don't have to worry about those kinds of things. And people don't realize the stress and the worries that they're putting on children who are already like overridden with anxiety just from being in this crazy ass world that we live in. Like that's stressful enough. They're going to school and they're worried about someone going to come in and shoot up the classroom today.
That's enough worry.
Is a plane going to fly into a building? I don't know. Is so-and-so going to play with me on the playground or not? Because it really hurts my feelings when they don't. And now they're carrying the emotional burden of, I can't do this because mom said dad can't afford it. And dad said, mommy's not smart or whatever the things are that's going back and forth. It's just it's crazy. But no, I don't think that dropping a snide remark here or there is alienation. I think it's stupid.
Right.
I think you shouldn't do it, but it's going to happen. And we've all done it. Myself included.
Myself included. 100%. Absolutely. And, I did a great podcast interview with Christina McGee on walking the really fine line between not throwing the other parent under the bus while also not gaslighting your kids. Because when your kids start to see some things and they start to ask questions, and they're asking like a lot harder questions as they get older in their teen years, you don't want to deny their reality of what they're seeing.
That's a great point.
And it's a very hard line to walk. It is.
But this is where I believe in age appropriate truth, no matter what. Right. So, Mommy, is it true that, daddy cheated on, this is not my experience, but I'm giving a hypothetical.
Yep,
is it true that daddy cheated on you? You're not going to say, oh no, that's silly. You're going to say daddy made a choice to have a relationship with somebody else. And that's why we're not together anymore. And then you move on from it. It's not that motherfucker. Yeah, he did. He couldn't keep it in his pants, right? There's a difference.
Yes.
Age appropriate truth is healthy.
Yes. And what Christina recommended to say in that, because I was coming up against that very question, and what Christina told me to say when I called her in a panic. She said, the answer to that is that was one of the things that contributed, and because, of course, in my mind, I'm like, what? One of the things? I mean, yes, it was one of the things. But as opposed to like, yes, he did. It is a yes, he did. But there are also other contributing factors, right?
Yeah. Listen, 4 years ago, I found a note I had written in my phone where Bella had said she decided one day in the backseat of my car that she knew why her dad and I got a divorce. Oh. I said, really? You do? She goes, yeah. And she said it so matter of factly. She goes, Mommy, You don't like gummy candy. Daddy loves it. You only eat chocolate candy. And that right there was a perfect place for me to say, it was so cute. And it's true. He loves gummy candy. I don't like gummies. But it was a perfect place for me to say, you know what? Sometimes people are different, and their differences make them realize that, maybe it's best that they're not together. And so now that she's older, she knows him and I couldn't be more different. She knows we love each other and we banter and we are both obsessed with her, but she knows that we ultimately, like, we're too different to be together. And that's where I think those age appropriate truths are really okay.
So great. I love that. That's the cutest thing ever.
It was
It's
cute.
the cutest thing ever, right? And then you build on that age appropriately.
And then I reminded her of that recently, that she said that. She was like, I did. I'm like, yes, look, I wrote it down. And she was like, oh, she was like, well, you probably don't want to be with him because he has a lot of gray hair now. I'm like, I do too. And then we go back to the conversation of like, what's true and what's appropriate for her to handle. But what I do in every situation, like if she, I don't make it like daddy was the problem. Like I include myself because I was also very much the problem,
right.
And I explained to her how I was different in that relationship versus in my marriage now. So she knows, what's real.
Yeah. And now a quick word from our sponsor. Wait, that's me. I know I have a lot of podcast episodes for you to get through, and it can be really, really overwhelming to try and figure out where to start or to comb through which ones might be appropriate for you, whether you're trying to decide whether to stay or go, or you're already on the other side of the divorce process. Like, how do you know what to listen to? I have solved the problem for you. All you have to do is go to kateanthony.com/playlist. Answer a few short questions, and I will send you a curated list of podcast episodes to best support you as you navigate these tricky waters. I'll also help you identify where you currently stand on this journey and what's ahead, with resources to help you move through this process with knowledge and grace. So all you need to do is go to kateanthony.com/playlist, answer a few short questions, and you will have your curated list of podcast episodes that will support you wherever you are in your journey. And now back to our show. How would you say you were the problem in that relationship? Like, what's your
I went into that very unhealed. I had a lot of trauma. That's like four episodes more that we could do, but so much that, I very much emotionally neglected through all the trauma that I went through. Nobody ever stopped and said, hey, are you okay? And on the contrary, whenever I did have a big emotion, it was like, oh, you're crazy. Oh, you're dramatic. Oh, so I went through life completely unsupported emotionally. Now, I will say that I have a great relationship with my mom, and she was always there for me, but there wasn't the understanding then that there is now about helping a child through difficult times. And so I didn't have therapy. I didn't have any of those things. I was estranged from my dad at the age of 11 when, everybody was wearing daddy's girl earrings. And I was like, mine wouldn't even come to my bat mitzvah. I stood up on the bima at my temple, like waiting for him to walk in, and he didn't. And it was the same with like my dancer side. It was such a visceral, awful time. Yeah. And then I had my stepfather who came into my life, who was like my knight in shining armor. And he died very tragically when I was 23. And I didn't have any support for that either. I was like, so worried about how my mom was going to feel. I was there watching him die, held his hand when he took his, anyway, so many things. Then I had lots of toxic relationships, bad boys.
Of course you did though. Like literally, of course you did.
So then I met my ex-husband, and he was just like, couldn't be more different from me. I was this like rough and tough New York chick who had just moved down to Florida. He was like this good old Southern boy from Atlanta, and like, like country music. And here I am, and we couldn't have been more different, but there was a pull there, and we fell in love very quickly. And I didn't stop to look at why this might not be good for me. Right. Right. Because we're different. We had different like interests, value, whatever. I also was nowhere near ready to accept such a committed relationship. I liked the ones that were fucked up, that I could keep at arm's length.
Right.
And so what I did was I started trying to do anything to sabotage it. And my ex, being the recipient of this big ball of trauma, he didn't know what to do with it. He was 30 years old. And like, so it just was a recipe for disaster. Like he was always like, what's wrong with you? And so it just, it always sent me spiraling.
Right. That compounds it. It's like, why are you being so dramatic? What's wrong with you? And you're like, that's my childhood trauma, as people task me, what the fuck is wrong with me? Right.
But I went and I admittedly, and it took me a long time to realize this, I went and took it all out on him. And that wasn't fair to him either. Whether or not he handled it the right way or not, that's another conversation. But like, ultimately, I was not ready for a relationship of that magnitude. I wasn't ready to, so that was the role that I played. And I knew as soon as I had Bella, I'm like, I got to change. This is not okay. I knew it was me. I knew I was quote unquote crazy. I knew I couldn't control my emotions. I knew I had these irrational fears that like overtook me all the time. And I had to get a grip because I had a child to raise. And part of that meant separating myself from the marriage so that I could see clearly and heal for myself.
That's right. Yeah. It's almost impossible to do that work inside of the container that is either triggering it, causing it, or, we can't do this work inside of a relationship sometimes.
It's really hard.
It's just too much. Some people can, but I just think that taking that time for yourself, even if it's temporary, it might be temporary, it might be permanent. Sometimes you don't know, right? Sometimes you don't know.
And listen, I grieved a lot and I did a lot of work. I started going to therapy in the marriage towards the tail end. And when I came out of it was the first time that I could kind of like see things clearly. And I had so much more self-awareness going into my second marriage, where my ex has asked me like, do you do what you did to me? Like, do you have all these fears with him? And it's like, no, sorry, I did the work, like, whoopsie, but it's terrible. And I'll never regret the relationship because when it was good, it was great. And we got Bella out of it. But I know I have the self-awareness to know where I was the problem.
Yeah. Right. And I bet he really ultimately appreciates that you're able to say, no, I don't, and I'm sorry, but also Bella isn't going to be raised in that. And I learned from my mistakes and right. Like, I'm sure he appreciates that part of you.
Yeah.
Right.
Listen, he got a side of me that nobody else will ever get, good and bad. Right. I mean, it's my first marriage. I was my most vulnerable. I was my most afraid, but I was also the most like hopelessly like, romantic, like
unjaded,
you don't know any better. Unjaded. Right. Right. That there's something to be said for that too. But anyway, all that aside, his daddy skills, are why I have always been so committed to co-parenting, even when, he may not have been ready to be my bestie and like be so amicable. He had to have his process he had a lot to deal with after we split up, understandably. I was like a hurricane that came through and, destroyed everything. But I've always, maintained this high road approach, and taking the high road for me is ultimately, if we bring it back to the kids, like that's where you put the kids first. You take the high road, you decide for yourself, you know what? I don't need to respond to that jab. And I don't need to, step into the box every time somebody wants to fight. Like, I'm going to push myself outside of that. I'm going to respond when I need to. I'm not going to go back and forth in unnecessary drama. That for me is taking the high road. And that is why we're in the place we're in now and why my daughter has such a healthy relationship with both of us.
Coming around to sort of co-parenting do's and don'ts, right? Like, because there's so many women, certainly a lot of women listening to this, who are in the midst of the hurricane and feeling so much resentment, right? And I always say, similarly, I say, keep your side of the street clean. Doesn't matter what they're doing. Keep your side of the street squeaky clean. But also, there is resentment. There is this, and when they're being attacked constantly and they are the only one, right? Can you be the only one to
Yes.
foster and create a healthy co-parenting relationship.
100% yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if somebody is throwing darts at you, right? Like you don't have to stand in front of them, right? You can like move to the side a little bit and say, you know what? I'm not going to let this dart hit me today because I need to be my best self for my kids. And if I start throwing them back, then everything's a hot mess. I 100% believe, thanks to the work of Bill Eddy and all of the research I've done, that it takes one reasonable parent in an unreasonable situation to raise a healthy child with a healthy, secure attachment to their caregiver.
Yes.
I think a lot of people will say, oh, well, you can't do that when the other person's a narcissist. I get that in my comments all day long. And I say, yes, you can.
Yes, you
and
can.
It's all the more reason to. If that person really is that, then you have to do the work tenfold to ensure that your children are okay. And that's the best work you'll ever do.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, right, you're all they've got.
You're all they've got. And they need a safe port in a storm. And I wrote about this in my book, with the example of if you're at the beach and you're having a lovely day and all of a sudden a storm rolls in and you didn't expect it. Everyone else is grabbing their shit and they're running off the beach. What are you going to do? You're going to stand there and yell at the storm and tell it not to come? Right. It's not going to work.
Right.
It's still going to come. It's still going to mess up your day unless you choose to remove yourself from that situation. Right. In this case, not responding to the text message, not trying to correct the accusation or the misinformation they're sending your way, deciding, you know what, I left this person for a reason. They're there in that space, in this little container. I'm here. I have my whole full life. They're just a person that was a part of it. I don't have to engage this.
Right. Right. And this is, what I talk about, we physically divorce, we financially divorce, we legally divorce.
The emotional divorce, baby.
That's right. If you're going to continue to engage in this way and like pick up everything they're putting down and stand on the beach and yell at the storm, then like, what's the point?
What's the point? You might as well have stayed together.
That's right.
You have to know, to anybody listening to this, we started on one tangent. We went to a total different one, but this is why I love our conversations. To anyone listening to this, it is impossible in the beginning to try and restrain yourself from yelling at the storm. But when you think of it in that way of how silly it might be to yell at a storm and expect it to not come and ruin your beach day, you realize, okay, maybe I need to take my energy and instead of trying to, right back to my ex when they tell me I'm a terrible mom because I took my kids to the park instead of reading with them, instead of correcting that misinformation, I'm just going to take that message, file it under, oh, this is why I left this person, and go about my day, right? Like it's very hard to do that. You're always going to want to fire back. Your Achilles heel, your trigger point is motherhood and your children, but you have to know that just because someone says something doesn't make it true. And what you give your energy to is going to take away from all the other beautiful things you could do with your life.
That's right. And what you resist persists. So
Amen.
The more you're pushing against it, the more it's going to push back at you, right?
Amen. Yeah. Like my waistline, girlfriend.
That's right.
The more I resist pasta, the more it persists in my life.
That's right. Speaking of, that's where I'm going tonight. I'm going to have pasta. I've decided. Speaking of co-parenting do's and don'ts, just very quickly, I know that we could go on for hours, but any quick tips? Co-parenting do's and don'ts. Don't rage at the storm.
Don't rage at the storm.
Yeah.
When, your ex is asking for something, in terms of the children, and you want to say no because in your mind, they don't deserve it. They shouldn't have it because of how they treated you. Put yourself in little Johnny's shoes and say, what will saying yes instead of no mean for this child? Will it benefit them? Do that. And I promise you, it's going to help shift your perspective on co-parenting. The idea that somebody shouldn't spend time with their children just because they may have wronged you is very unfair for the kid. So, I give the example. I had this post that went slightly viral about, if my ex thinks I'm going to let him take Bella on my day to the hockey game just because he got tickets, the answer is yes, I am going to let him do that because she loves hockey and that's where they bond. And I'm the asshole if I say no. So, having that.
Yes. It's not, and I think it's like the way that we talk about things. It's not my time. It's not my time and his time.
It's my day. It's my
her time. It's her experience.
Yes.
Right?
That's a big one for me.
People are like, he's going to take the kids to Disneyland with his new wife, and I won't get to experience them going to Disneyland for the first time. Does she get to go to Disneyland?
Do you know that?
Awesome.
My ex and I couldn't agree on who would take Bella to Disney first. So we went together and we put all this effort and energy, and it was so uncomfortable because we were still at the beginning of our split. And you know what? She doesn't remember a goddamn thing, people. She doesn't even know that trip happened.
She was two. Of course not.
She was 3.5 at the time, but still anyway. And my last tip that I'd like to share, which may seem counterproductive to all of the work that I do, is cut yourself some slack. If you have to parallel parent, great. Sometimes that's the healthiest thing. Co-parenting is a misnomer. Co means together. It means collaborative. That's something that is very hard to do when you're trying to live without this person in the first couple of years. Most people, in my experience, myself included, are parallel parenting in the beginning. And sometimes it's great because you can just stay in your lane. They can stay in theirs. Emotions subside. People get used to parenting on their own and create their own new routines. And then time passes and you're like, oh, maybe now we can have a conversation about this. Oh, maybe now we can both sit on the same side of the field at the soccer game. Give it time. You don't have to come out of the gate and be besties in order to be good co-parents. Sometimes great co-parenting looks like parallel parenting.
I could not agree more. I actually believe that all people should start with co-parenting. Co-parenting should, I mean, with parallel parenting. Parallel parenting is where it should begin, right? And if you grow into co, then fucking great. But give yourself the time.
You have a better
to individuate.
You have a better. We talked about this on your podcast. You have a better chance of growing into co-parents if you start small. Just like you're giving your kids that step-up plan, you need one too, and you also need the space to disconnect yourself emotionally divorced from the person, which you can't do if 2 weeks after you kick them out of the house, you're inviting them over for dinner. So give yourself the space. That is the biggest tip, I think.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. Could not agree more. I love you.
I love you too.
So much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I value you. I value your work. I value your friendship. And I'm just, so grateful for you.
Ditto, girlfriend. Thank you. Thank you for having me. To everybody listening, I don't want you to have a fear of your attorney. Just make sure you are working with somebody who asks the questions, who gets to know your children. Everybody that you hire in your divorce process should ask you this one question. So tell me about your kids, because that matters a lot.
Yeah. And what do you want for your kids? What's the experience that you want for your children in this?
Yeah.
I think that's primary. And that question got me through my divorce. We had the guiding principle, the guiding question of, what's best for our son. And there were some decisions that we made that were really hard and shit that wasn't best for me, but it was best for my son. And I had to let it go.
Yep. You have to let it go. It's the hardest thing in the world, but it's so important.
So important. My love, where can everybody who doesn't already, I don't know anyone listening to this who doesn't already follow you or know where you are, but if by some reason someone doesn't know, where can they find you?
I am on Instagram at the Michelle Dempsey. My podcast is Moms Moving On. My book is Moms Moving On, Real Life Advice on Conquering Divorce, Co-Parenting Through Conflict, and Becoming Your Best Self. You could find that anywhere they sell books, including Target. So you can add to cart if you're divorce curious and you don't want your partner to know. They won't even question the extra $20 at Target. My website is michelledempsey.com. And there you can learn about working one-on-one with me or one of my coaches, or taking my program to become certified as a coach, or my courses, my things. There's lots of stuff. I can't keep up with myself.
I know. Same girl. Thank you, my love. Everybody go check out Michelle, her podcast, read her book. I have 2 copies of it. I don't know how I got 2, but I'm thrilled that I did. I love you.
Love you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. If you like what you hear, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen in and leave me a review. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at The Divorce Survival Guide. I'll see you next time, and until then, remember, you, my love, deserve to be happy.